Joe Pollak is an author of Wacko Birds, and you see that right there on your outlines. And it's a book that you can get to online. He is the editor of Breitbart, California. And if you don't know what Breitbart is a leading conservative news outlet. Joel is a graduate of Harvard Law School. We won't hold that against him. Well, we'll see what he has to say. So is Barack Obama, but who wants to bring that up? Joel ran for Congress in Illinois and moved to California in 2011 to work with Andrew Breitbart, one of our great heroes. He's a former researcher and a noted defense lawyer Alan Dershowitz, and a former speechwriter for South African opposition leader Tony Leon. Joel lives in Santa Monica with his wife Julia. He's a Rand Research Fellow and a Navy reservist, and their 2-year-old daughter is named Maya. Is that right? Perfect. Would you please welcome Joe Pollak as he comes to speak to us tonight about the Tea Party, our future, and what we have in store for us as a movement. Would you please welcome Joel?
Thank you all very much. Thank you for that kind introduction. Thank you for the introduction by Michelle Moods, our Breitbart California reporter, who brought me to the Tea Party here tonight, and to Jill for organizing this and getting me here. It's great to see you all. My fellow Harvard Law School graduate, Ted Cruz, is one of the alumni we're proudest of. And in fact, Alan Dershowitz, who's quite openly liberal Democrat, had his retirement party last year and he invited me to speak. And I said, gee, Alan, your most prominent student these days is, and everyone expected me to say Barack Obama, and I said Ted Cruz, and he sank about 6 inches in his chair. My wife is actually the Rand researcher and Navy reservist, so I don't want to bask in her glory, but she's, we come down this way often. We often pass through and stop along the way because her reserve duties in Coronado at North Island. She's a helicopter mechanic and was just named Blue Jacket of the Year at North Island on Sunday, so I'm very proud of her. And eager to get back tonight, but very happy to be with you. And I'll tell you a bit about Wacko Birds, I'll tell you a bit about Breitbart, and then we can have a freewheeling conversation in the time we have allotted to us. Wacko Birds is an ebook. It was a book idea that was suggested to me actually right after the shutdown of 2013. Now you remember the shutdown was supposed to destroy any chances the Republican Party had for retaking the Senate. It was going to destroy the Tea Party. It was going to do all these things. Nobody remembers the shutdown anymore. But I argued at the time that it actually had a positive effect. And that effect was to tell the American people that somebody was standing up against Obamacare on the eve of Obamacare coming into effect. And when that website went down on October 1st, 2013, I was so glad that Ted Cruz and so many others had stood up against it on September 30th, the night before. And people who said, well, this is just gestural politics, it's just symbolism, they can't stop the government from going forward with what it's doing. I said, yes, but symbols matter. And especially in opposition politics, symbols matter. And I think that was an insight that the Tea Party leaders in the Senate had that other people didn't have. So I sat down to write Wacko Birds. Wacko Birds, of course, being the name that John McCain gave to Rand Paul and Ted Cruz when they stood up and filibustered Obama's drone policy. He apologized for that later, but that's still what people call the Tea Party in Washington. So my question was really this: why is it that those Tea Party principles that you spoke about at the beginning of this meeting, why is it that they're overwhelmingly favored by 2/3 of Americans? If you ask Americans whether they agree with limited government, low taxes, 2/3 of Americans will agree. On Obamacare, I think something like 59% of people now want it repealed. That's a core Tea Party policy position and has been since the beginning almost. And yet if you ask people what they think of the Tea Party, they don't like it. Maybe 1 in 4 say that they're favorable towards the Tea Party and half don't like it, the others don't know. But why is it that the Tea Party's brand is so weak and the Tea Party's values are so strong? So I tried to decode some of this as well as to explain what the Tea Party is about. So I go through chapter by chapter. I talk about the history of the Tea Party from its early beginnings opposing the stimulus and the TARP bailouts to the Obamacare fight, through the debt ceiling, and to the present day. And I also talk about some of the political leaders that have represented the Tea Party in Washington and their ups and downs. I don't just stay in Washington. I talk in one chapter about the states and about Scott Walker in particular. I use as kind of an example of a successful Tea Party leader in government, right? The Tea Party isn't just about opposition, it's also about changing government, which Scott Walker has done very successfully in Wisconsin. So that's what Wacko Birds does, and basically says, look, this is an amazing movement. It has revived public interest in the Constitution. It has stopped the spending from increasing at the rate it was in Washington. It hasn't quite rolled it back, but we'll see what happens after January 3rd. It has held Obama in check, and it really is where all the action is in politics in America today. And the left knows it, and they are jealous. That's why they ridicule the Tea Party. That's why the Occupy Wall Street movement got so much attention, because the left felt a kind of political envy. They wanted to reset the agenda in their favor again, and they couldn't quite get it done. That's why the media disparages the Tea Party and so forth. It's amazing, we've come full circle. 4 years ago, the NAACP was calling the Tea Party racist, which I suppose they still do. But this week, the NAACP said that the Ferguson protesters were like the Tea Party from 1773. So now they're kind of basking in that glow. They want to catch up to the Tea Party brand. So people disparage the Tea Party not knowing what it is, but what you've actually done here tonight in this room and in Tea Parties around the country is you've really lived the promise of the Constitution, you've lived out the vision of the founders, and you've begun to establish or reestablish that kind of Republican democracy that they envisioned, of an active citizenry that can be self-governing. Andrew Breitbart saw that, and I worked with him very closely until he passed away suddenly in March 2012, but he really was drawn to the Tea Party by its authenticity. He said, this is a movement of people who are real people, they believe what they're saying, they act as they speak, they are the complete antidote to politics in the Obama era. And when he hired me, I think I was number 5 or number 6 at the company, and it's just exploded in terms of its growth since then. We now have, I think, somewhere close to 40 employees in different places. We'll never quite get to 50 because then Obamacare kicks in, you see, so we can't really do that. But we have branches all over the place, and Breitbart California has made an impact. We see our role as Breitbart California not so much to push a conservative political agenda, which of course we subscribe to, but to expose what Blue America looks like when it's unfettered by any real opposition. You know, this is what you're getting. So we're the biggest cheerleaders right now for Jerry Brown to run for president. We want to get him out there so people understand more clearly what this really means. But you know, we're kind of ambassadors to the rest of America of what happens in a state where you don't have an effective opposition, where your opposition party rolls over basically and allows a lot of the things to happen that shouldn't. There are some outstanding Republican representatives who do a great job of representing their constituents and who really do care. But unfortunately, over the last 10 years, and this is not necessarily just a political problem, it's an economic problem, a lot of the base of the Republican Party has eroded or changed in a fundamental way. So California has an acute shortage of leaders, but they're out there, and you're part of the solution here tonight. So Andrew saw that. He always would do anything to go to a Tea Party meeting. In fact, one of the last conversations I had with him before he passed away, he was on his way to a Tea Party meeting in Detroit. He was always going to speak to people, didn't matter how many or how few. He wanted to connect to the people he felt were changing America. And that's still what we have in our minds, not just to write about things, but also to facilitate a dialogue that really gets back to our founding fathers' vision for this country, which my family has embraced. We're an immigrant family. My wife was embraced by serving the country, and it's a continually renewing set of values, because it is a universal set of values, and there's nothing to be ashamed of in it. And I think that the Tea Party, the subtitle of my book, Wacko Birds, is The Fall and Rise of the Tea Party. Why the fall? Because when the Tea Party came to Washington after 2010, people assumed it was going to do great things right away, and there was this fall off in enthusiasm. There were some disappointments along the way. But as we can see now, there's been this rise, this massive Republican victory, unexpected in the recent elections, in most places except for California, but in most of the country. And the emergence of new leaders. Now they're going to have to listen to Ted Cruz. They're going to have to listen to Senator Lee. They're going to have to listen to Rand Paul. And we're going to have a fantastic presidential contest in 2016 when all of these values are really going to define who the next leader of the nation is. So with that, let me cut my remarks off, and I think we have time, hopefully, for a few more questions. I always enjoy hearing from people, and challenging questions are also welcome. Yes, sir.
This is going to probably sound like an idiotic question, but when I hear somebody speak and they've got a good book out, I buy it and have them autograph it. I've never bought an ebook before. How do you autograph the book?
The question is, how do you autograph an ebook? You can't, but I'll send you a very nice email if you buy it. Working on an next book, which will come out in print, but this one I wanted to rush through before the election, so I did it in ebook format. So that's how that worked out. Yes, ma'am.
What do you think is the prospect for repealing Obamacare?
It gets better every day. Repealing Obamacare, the prospects grow better every day. First of all, there's this court case that the Supreme Court will decide this term about whether the federal government has unconstitutionally, unlawfully set up the state Obamacare exchanges. According to the letter of the law, they're only allowed to provide federal subsidies to states that set up their own exchanges. That's what the law says. There are 14 states that have done so, 36 that have not. Everywhere else, you've got to go on healthcare.gov or some version of a federally run exchange, but there's no statutory authority for doing that and getting the subsidies on those exchanges. So the Supreme Court, if they take a strict reading of the law, which they really have to, they're going to destroy the foundations of Obamacare. All these millions of people who have gotten subsidies to buy insurance are going to lose their subsidies. Not all of them, many of them. The left is terrified of this, and so they're trying to describe this as a typo. You know, oh, there's a typo in the law, but that's now been completely undercut by this Professor Gruber from MIT, who was caught on tape saying several times, no, we intended to do this because we wanted to punish the states that didn't set up exchanges by creating an incentive. So, first of all, that increases the chances of repeal, because once that happens, the law basically becomes ineffective, so the Democrats are going to want to do something new. The other thing that starts to happen is all these new taxes start kicking in. So the Cadillac tax on the most generous health plans, that kicks in 2018. Well, when that kicks in, it's not just going to affect the people who have the most generous healthcare plans. Those costs are eventually going to expand. Again, thank you, Professor Gruber. He explains how this is supposed to work. It's supposed to bring in more and more of these health insurance plans until eventually it targets almost all of the employer-provided healthcare benefits. So more and more Americans are getting swept into this, not wanting to be swept into it. We just did an article on Breitbart this week about a poll that showed that minority support for Obamacare has dipped below 60% for the first time. Now, you might think, well, 60%, I mean, that's not saying much, but it is actually saying something. As more and more people experience Obamacare, they don't want it, they don't like it. They're having to travel further to see doctors, they lose their insurance, they pay more. There are some people who do like it, but that's mostly because they're getting expanded Medicaid, for which they were probably already eligible. So it's slowly unraveling, and it's becoming a huge political burden on the Democrats. So I think you're going to see a constituency bill for replacing it or repealing it. Now, the difficulty is, what do you do to placate those who already have Obamacare insurance that they like, that they want to keep? So I think that's a problem that's easily fixable that Republicans can do in whatever new proposal they present. But I think it is increasingly likely, of course Obama won't sign anything, and you won't get a 2/3 majority to override a veto right now, but in 2017, if there's a Republican president, I'm almost certain it will be repealed. Yes, Joe.
I've heard in the news that President Obama has decided that if the Congress and Senate don't go along with his immigration, that he's going to push it through on his own accord, therefore becoming a monarchy. I've also heard that they're talking of impeachment. Now, if he's impeached, would that basically tie his hands for the next 18 months and keep him quiet?
The question is about this executive order that Obama wants to push through. So I'm not sure exactly why he's doing it. I think that his party elders, Axelrod, some of the people who advised his campaigns are telling him not to do it. They understand that if he does this, it's going to destroy the Democratic Party's political fortunes for many years to come. He himself has argued why he can't do it, now he wants to do it. I don't know what it means for our country as a whole. The thing is, though, that impeachment and shutdown have been taken off the table by the Republican leadership in Washington. And they're trying to come up with all sorts of other ways to stop him from doing it. My own suggestion was, as long as they're taking impeachment and shutting down the government off the table, they should defund the White House. If he can't be trusted to carry out his responsibilities effectively, then he can't go anywhere in Air Force One, he can't play golf, you know, he can't he'll just sit and take over. He can carry out basic security functions and things like that, and maybe he'll start showing up to the briefings he misses on intelligence and so forth. But he's grounded if he doesn't do what he's supposed to do, and what he's supposed to do is to execute the laws Congress has passed. If he decides he's not going to do that, and the Republican leaders don't want to impeach him and so forth, then we have to find some other way. But the proposals they're considering now are proposals to defund other parts of the government, defund Department of Homeland Security, for example, which would have to carry out his executive order. The problem is that you can't carry out a threat to defund something unless you're willing to shut down something. So if you're not willing to shut the government down, then no one's going to take that defunding threat seriously at the end of the day. So I think the Republicans are actually running out of options other than defunding, or in other words, not passing a budget. And I think that increasingly, I think Americans would understand why they're not doing it. I think Americans understand that this would be really crossing a line. Immigration, by the way, is not an important issue for almost anybody. It's not the most important issue for Latino voters. It's not the most, I think 4% of Americans say it's the most important issue for them. It's entirely a political ploy by the Democratic Party to maintain and build a voter advantage among Latino voters, which, by the way, they don't have everywhere. And when Republicans campaign in very smart ways, they can win the Latino vote. They did in several races this fall. So anyway, as far as impeachment goes, he probably wouldn't be convicted. You'd have to have 2/3 of the Senate to convict. So,
But we run the Senate, don't we now?
we run the Senate, but we will only have 53, 54 votes at most. And Republicans have never had the kind of dominance in the Senate and the House that Democrats had in the early part of Obama's term, at least not in recent memory. And it's unlikely to happen. 2016 is going to be a tough year for Republicans in the Senate. So they have to get creative, but they have to face the fact that they may have to build up to a confrontation and they have to stand firm. Hopefully, if they do get to that point, they will. I had a question here, and then I'll do those two in the back, and then I think Jill's going to give me the hook.
Yeah, Jill, first off, thank you, and Michelle and the whole organization, and the things that you guys do. I really appreciate it. I'd like for you to pull out your crystal ball. Who do you think are the 6 people, the conservatives, that are going to be running in 2016?
Okay, the question was conservatives running in 2016. So let's start with the senators. Rand Paul and Ted Cruz, I think, are going to run. You'll then go to the governors who are thinking of running. Scott Walker may run. Rick Perry is almost certainly going to run. You're seeing some indication that Mike Pence of Indiana could run. And then there's an outsider, Ben Carson, who looks like he's running. He had a very successful fundraising in his PAC. So that's 6 names for you right there. Huckabee may run as well. That's right, he may run. He's very strong in Iowa, which I think is the strongest case for him running, that he could win Iowa as he did in 2008. So Rick Santorum may run. I think you're going to see a wide field, and I think the field will broadly agree on domestic policy. I think there will be some differences that are very interesting over foreign policy, and it's one of the things I talk about in Wacko Birds. I talk about how the Tea Party is kind of ambivalent on foreign policy. It has many different views on foreign policy within it. You have Ted Cruz, who's very hawkish on certain issues, and you have Rand Paul, who has more of a keep it at home kind of approach. I won't call it isolationist, because that's not really fair to him. He's not really as isolationist as some of the real isolationists were in the mid-20th century. But anyway, it's going to be very interesting either way. Let's see, 2 more. One in the back and then one over there.
So to go back to the executive amnesty, I keep hearing and reading on both sides of the fence the legality of it. Is it illegal or is it not illegal? I can't get a clear.
It's legal, but it's also an egregious stretch. Let me put it this way. It's one of those things where it violates the spirit of the Constitution. Absolutely. Not just violates, but really attacks. He'll use prosecutorial discretion. He could use his pardon power as president. The pardon power is unlimited under the Constitution. The president can pardon lots of people. He doesn't just pardon a few. If he can do whatever he wants, he or she. But to do this when Congress has explicitly said we're not passing this legislation, or we're not passing it yet, or whatever, to fly in the face of congressional intent, clear congressional intent, and the political will of the American people would be such a violation of the separation of powers, at least in theory. And to it would essentially amount to an abuse of those powers of office. And that, I think, would reach grounds for impeachment. He's not faithfully executing. Look, the key area where he really falls apart on this is not executing the laws. And that's his constitutional duty. And that's, is it legal for him to back away from certain things? Yes, on the margins, but not in such a massive way. It's really a case where the question of degree becomes a question of kind. He's doing it on such a vast scale that it becomes a violation in that way. Yes, last question, and then I'm done.
No, you got more time.
Oh, I do, okay.
Can I follow up? Let me follow up on that.
Okay.
What's different between, because this is the argument, well, Reagan did it, Bush did it, why can't Obama do it?
So the argument that's been made, I saw it on MSNBC today, was Reagan and George H.W. Bush did the same thing. They did it in specific circumstances. So for example, they gave people, there was amnesty that Reagan signed, but that was passed by Congress. He used his executive order to prevent people from being deported, but that was specific to cases where there was turmoil and unrest in those specific countries, where to send people back to those countries was literally to sentence them to, to death or worse. I don't know what's worse than death, but something very bad. The executive orders George H.W. Bush enacted also applied to very few people, and they were about cleaning up some loose ends from the 1986 Simpson-Mazzoli Act that Reagan signed. So, in other words, they were carrying out congressional intent. They weren't violating congressional intent. In this case, Obama would be clearly violating congressional intent. And that's the major difference here. It's Obama flying in the face of not just congressional intent, but the vast majority of the country, which has been expressed in the recent election.
January 1st in California, we have our carbon footprint gas tax going into effect. I've heard 56 cents per gallon. What have you heard? And, with oil prices coming down, gas prices coming down, I'm sure they will sell however much they want carbon footprint taxes. What do you think it's going to be?
The question was about the new carbon footprint tax in California. I don't know the exact number, but I have seen numbers in that range. Tim Donnelly, Assemblyman Donnelly, has written a lot about this, and he's written on Breitbart. So if you look at Breitbart, California, he'll explain to you how they get to that number and how all these taxes are loaded in. Of course, that bill was signed by Governor Schwarzenegger, and I think that's a big part of the Republican Party's problem in California. You can elect Republicans statewide, but when the Republicans you elect do things that are not conservative, then the enthusiasm falls out of the voter base, and I think that signing that law was one of those things. But people will start to dislike that text very quickly.
You really think that?
Yeah, you might see some political will to roll back some of that. Yes, sir.
How much does the new Attorney General nominee, Loretta Lynch, how much does she mirror Eric Holder?
The question was about Loretta Lynch and Eric Holder. I think she's different. I think Loretta Lynch she's a Democrat, she's a liberal, but more of a career prosecutor who's dealt with the nitty-gritty of going after thugs and criminals and terrorists. Holder was from the other side of those cases. Holder's white shoe law firm was defending the terrorists. He is an ideological figure even more than a political figure. He carries around a quote in his wallet from some radical that said something about race. I can't remember the specifics about it, but he's got a chip on his shoulder about racial issues. He calls us a nation of cowards. Loretta Lynch is not a person like that. Loretta Lynch is a person who, from at least what I can tell on her record, has expressed gratitude toward the country. She talks about how her mother worked as a farmhand and how she made it to Harvard and Harvard Law School, and everyone who's worked with her has had a positive opinion of her, except some of the defendants who write to me now and say she's a really terrible person and she should never be confirmed. But I think she's actually a qualified person. I've actually written, she's probably more qualified than Eric Holder. And it's the ideological nature of the Obama administration that Loretta Lynch was not nominated ahead of somebody like Holder. I mean, someone like her really should have been Attorney General first, because she is a committed prosecutor with a real track record. So I'm not as worried about her, and you know, I think she'll probably do a fine job. Common Core. Yeah, Common Core is interesting because it's hard to see how it's going to go. There's a real division among conservatives about Common Core. Some people like the idea in theory of promoting standards in education, you know, which is really a conservative idea, opposing the idea that you just pass everybody, you know, for social reasons and whatever. But the problem, of course, is federalizing Common Core, of taking education decisions out of the hands of communities, and like everything else in the Obama administration on education, it's been used to grab more power over the curriculum. Same thing happened with Race to the Top. You know, Race to the Top was a good idea. We want to reward innovation. We want to reward merit pay for teachers and things like that. But because it's got those federal funding strings attached, it's a backdoor way of getting federal control over education systems. So that's the problem with Common Core. I don't know what's going to happen to it. I think there will be some states that implement it, and there will be some states that don't. And what you'll have to see, I think, is a reform movement that develops political roots in both parties. In this state, they almost elected, they being the reformists, almost elected Marshall Tuck as superintendent, and he got all kinds of pushback from the Democratic Party, and he's a Democrat. But when you start to see some of those people come to the fore, I think that you'll start to see a broader consensus for looking more carefully at what education is actually doing. You know, my concerns about Common Core are about taking control away from communities and about some of the substance of what they're teaching. And there's a great article about it by Bill Bennett, I think, in the Wall Street Journal about a month ago. He wrote about how a good conservative idea around standards got hijacked by the Obama administration. My sister is a public school teacher, and she really hates Race to the Top. She can't, not Race to the Top, was No Child Left Behind. You know, this idea that you got to teach to the test all the time. So she kind of likes the idea of teaching to material rather than tests. So she was asking me, what do conservatives think about Common Core? And it's a complicated story, but I think what unites conservatives in their concern, whether they were for Common Core originally or not, is the idea that Obama is using it like he uses everything else to take control away from communities. All right.
Just one thing.
Okay.
Oh, did someone else have a question? Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, one of the great benefits of the Tea Party is to focus on issues that nobody else is paying attention to. But even the Tea Party is not perfect. So what would you say is the biggest policy issue that the Tea Party is not paying enough attention to?
That's a fantastic question. So one of the things I talk about in my book is the one core failure of the Tea Party, I think, or challenge that people are facing, we should say more positively, is leadership. How does the Tea Party cultivate leadership? And I think you're starting to see that come to the fore, hopefully, in the new Congress. But in policy terms, I think that if the Tea Party can wrap its arms around foreign policy on a national scale, not that there has to be one view, but if the Tea Party can find some way to express its view in a way that's consistent with conservative fiscal principles, I think that's the real challenge. How do you have an effective foreign policy and at the same time balance the federal budget? That's a tough issue, and that's going to come up a lot in this election when foreign policy is going to be on the minds of a lot of American voters. And certainly Hillary Clinton, although her track record is terrible in foreign policy, is going to say, well, I have foreign policy experience and these conservatives don't know anything. On the state level, you know, I told Neil Kashkari's people when I had a chance to meet him during the campaign was, you got to focus on high-speed rail. You really got to point out what a major boondoggle it is and how it's going to absolutely drain the resources of the state, how too few people use the low-speed rail in California for us to be introducing high-speed. You know, it's got crony capitalism, it's got all kinds of, I mean, on a state level, I think it's a winning issue. It's the one issue on which a vast majority of Californians agree with the conservative Tea Party position on this. I'm not saying you have to oppose public transportation. I mean, I'm getting back on the Amtrak and going back to LA in a little while. I like public transportation, but I like it when it can pay for itself. And this is a disaster. I think locally, if the Tea Party can get something going around this, I think it'd be great. That's my personal view. Maybe there are other views, but I think that's a big state issue for the Tea Party.
And that was
basically just kind of the future, the leadership of the Tea Party. And I really think we're winning. I think the opposition just doesn't want us to know that, including on our own
yeah.
side.
I think the Tea Party is winning and is strong and is going to define the next president of the United States, whoever that is. I think the Tea Party is going to play the decisive role, and I hope the Tea Party will stage debates and really apply its pressure to candidates in the early rounds. We at Breitbart would love to host some debates, but you know what we can do, we'll do. But you know, if you really put their feet to the fire, I think you'll start to see a real change in how the issues are framed going into 2016. And you know, it's great to meet you. If you want to reach me, I'm at jpollak@breitbart.com, and there are folks here who have my contact information. If you want to find out more about the book, it's at wacko-birds.com. And of course, you can read us every day at breitbart.com. So thank you very much for having me with you. It's great to be with you.